Hi there. My name is Summer Cohen, and you are watching episode 3 of Breaking Frum. Today's episode is going to be a little more similar to episode 1 in the sense that I'm going to be reviewing a YouTube video, or YouTube videos, rather, that I found just through scrolling my algorithm. I felt it was pertinent for me to respond to them. So, to give a little bit of context as to what we're going to be doing today, these two videos were published separately by Rabbi Manis Friedman. One of them is titled 3 Tips for Women Only, and the other one is titled 3 Tips for Men, parentheses, all caps, ladies don't listen. But seemingly they go together, right? Seemingly a couple would watch these videos separately, and depending on their gender, that's the one that they would watch. And they were supposed to get whatever Rabbi Manis Friedman was communicating to them and apply it to their marriage. So naturally, I watched both of them. Frankly, often when I come away from watching or reading something that this particular rabbi has published or created, I don't tend to agree with it. Obviously, there are some things that I think are important and good, and there are other things that I think he completely misses the mark on. And I found this particular series to be harmful in some cases and a little off-putting. And naturally, when I have a issue with something, my initial instinct is to start a dialogue. So that's what I'm doing today. I am going to show snippets of Rabbi Manis Friedman's video, and I'm going to be responding to them. The beginning of this video is going to be slightly discombobulated because I want to give the audience a sense of why I immediately took issue with the subject matter and what was being said. I kind of want to set the stage for what my response to these videos is going to be. So meaning I'm going to take 2 separate quotes from each video and compare them to one another, to kind of set the stage. And then after that, I'm going to continue by just watching the 3 tips for women all the way through, and then we will circle back and watch the 3 tips for men all the way through. And once we are done watching, I'm going to intersperse my feedback throughout the clips, and then when we're done, I'm going to give maybe an overall consensus of what I did not appreciate, what I think might have been harmful, and how we should talk about such subjects moving forward, in a productive way that is not about tearing people down or passing judgment, right? For a little bit of context, these videos explicitly are tips for a married couple to bring into their marriage to make their marriage better. While I don't agree with a lot of the methodology of how Rabbi Manis Friedman sets out to do this, I don't think his intentions are necessarily in the wrong place. However, I think when we compare some of the tips he gives to women versus some of the tips that he gives to men, we might grow a sense of why there is a perhaps double standard, why perhaps one party is being held to a much higher standard than another. and how that could be deeply harmful and impactful, especially for a newly married couple or two people who are engaged, who are about to enter a marriage with one another. So I want to start out by watching our first clip that it can be found in Three Tips for Men. And just a disclaimer, I am going to be cutting out specific clips of these videos. So my intention is not to rip certain quotes from the video and like twist them into something that isn't there, which is why I'm going to provide the link to the original videos in the description so that you can go maybe even watch the videos first for yourself, come back and watch mine, just so that you have a baseline understanding of what's being talked about, and you can kind of form your own conclusions before listening to my own. Because I think that allows for a little bit more of an interesting dialogue anyway. So let's get started.
Well, what about the fact that because you're married, you have the right to be intimate? Nobody else does. It's not a right, it's not a privilege. When you're married, you are committed to intimacy. It's not a right. You can't demand it. That's like a poor man knocking on your door and saying, "Give me my money." You say, "I don't have your money. I have to give my money. I don't have your money." The fact that I have an obligation or a commitment to God that I would give to the needy means I am responsible to God for this mitzvah, not I have your money. So if I decide not to fulfill my responsibility to God, that's between me and God. You have no rights here.
Starting off strong with the sentiment that nobody has the right to somebody else's intimacy. And then he continues to talk about how it is also not a privilege, because he goes into the story, again, as we just watched, of a poor man knocking on your door, likening intimacy to money, and says that intimacy between a couple is a commitment made with God, not necessarily with one another. Of course, a married couple commits to this act. Generally speaking, they commit to do that when they get married, but the commitment ultimately is to God. This is what Rabbi Friedman is saying. I would like to compare this to a quote that he gives specifically to women only.
There are three things a wife can do to make the marriage, the relationship better on her own, without discussing it, without sharing it, without getting an agreement, unilaterally. Number one, never reject even the slightest favor or service that a husband offers, because a man thrives on giving. When you accept what he gives, you make him feel like a man.
So, between these two videos, we go from Rabbi Friedman expressing that a man does not have the right to a woman's intimacy. A man cannot demand sex between him and his wife, and that sex does not belong to man. Sex belongs to God. And then In this video, we see Rabbi Friedman saying, across the board, every little thing, and he says this in his video, every little thing, a woman ought not to reject her husband. A woman ought not to reject her husband. A woman, under no circumstances, no matter how big or small something is, should never reject her husband giving something to her, lest she make him feel like less of a man. Already, we are painting a little bit of a picture here about when you say a man is not deserving of a woman's intimacy. And then you turn around and you look at his wife and you say, but you should still never reject him, right? But again, you're also saying to the husband, your wife has a duty to God. You also have a duty to God. But in this case, we are assuming that it is the woman not fulfilling her duty to God, right? So, you cannot force your wife, chas v'shalom, to do something she does not want to do. But that would remain her failure to God. It has nothing to do with him. That's on her. That's her failure to Hashem. What you are outlining here is that there is no choice. There is no choice in the matter, and that even if a man technically does not, cannot demand sex of his wife, he can acknowledge that she is sinning by doing so. And it is also being communicated to a woman that her job is to say yes to her husband. I'm not going to comment too much initially. I want to continue on watching some of these clips, commenting as I go. Again, we're going to continue now on the 3 tips for women, but ultimately my purpose in doing that was to kind of set the stage for why I wanted to comment on this and why I wanted to say something. Because my hope always is that anyone who is watching this might think about things differently, might feel seen, heard, and understood, and it might prevent someone from engaging in a relationship that feels coercive, traumatizing, or harmful. So, with that, let's continue with the rest of the video.
To be demanding or critical of what he's offering discourages him from offering.
So, again, to say no to your husband under any circumstance is to communicate to him that you never want him, which frankly says nothing about you as a person, says nothing about you as a woman to say no to X, Y, or Z. That does not communicate something about your husband. That does not communicate something about your partner. That does not even communicate that you're saying no for good. If your partner takes that no and projects it onto himself and says, my partner doesn't want me, I'm not good enough, and now I am discouraged from engaging with my spouse, they have a lack of self-esteem that is on them to do something about, not on you.
But every time he gives, your job is to receive.
Again, that same sucker punch to the gut, that same message, just said in plain language here. Every time your husband gives, your job, your imperative is to receive him. It is not to say no to him. When you say things like this, you are telling a woman that she is without choice, that she lacks the option to have any bodily autonomy. And you put the entirety of her husband's emotional well being, his self esteem, onto her. You make it her problem, you make it her responsibility, leaving him with very, very little.
There's a story about the first Lubavitcher Rebbe 200 years ago. He was collecting charity for ransoming people who had been arrested by their landowner, were in dungeons, and the only way to get them out is by ransoming them. So he collected money for that. He came to a town and he asked for a list of all the wealthy uh, members. There was one very wealthy man who was not on the list. And the Rebbe inquired, why wasn't this man's name on the list? And they told him this man is very wealthy, but he's also very stingy. He never gives. In fact, he has this nasty habit. He has this one coin, a 10-cent piece or whatever. Any request, no matter what the need is, he offers that coin. And people refuse it. It's embarrassing, it's insulting. The Rebbe says, let's go to his house first. Reluctantly, they went. And of course, the Rebbe presented the need, the great, desperate need. The man offered the coin. The Rebbe took it, thanked him, blessed him, and walked out the door. The man chased after the Rebbe and said, wait, I can do better. And he gave some more. The Rebbe thanked him and blessed him, and again got up to leave. And the man said, wait, I think I can do better than that. And he gave a really generous donation. When they left, the people, the Rebbe, who were accompanying the Rebbe, said, you truly are a miracle worker. That was a miracle. And the Rebbe said, no, it's not a miracle. No one ever gave him the opportunity to feel the pleasure, experience the pleasure of giving, because they always threw the coin back at him. All I did was thank him for his donation. And it felt really good. So he said, wait, I can get into this. I can enjoy giving.
So, once again, likening intimacy to money. It's highly disrespectful to both parties. It's not just women. This is also highly disrespectful to men. This idea that intimacy for men is very physical, intimacy for women is entirely emotional, as if we are not complex beings, and both of those things can be true for both people. I would like to make a little bit of a demonstration. This is perhaps the most important piece of money, whatever currency, that I own. I've never spent it, and I never will. Because this is a dollar bill from the Rebbe. When he was giving out dollar bills, he gave one to my father, who gave one to me. So this piece of money means a whole lot to me. However, I could never compare this physical object that means a whole deal to me. It's a source of comfort, it's a source of safety, knowing I have it in my pocket. Uh, it's almost like a good luck charm, right? I could never compare even this to the neshama of a Jewish woman or a Jewish man for that matter. All right? But for the purposes of this conversation, I could not fathom saying that a piece of currency is a worthy comparison to the state of a Jewish neshama. When we are talking about tzedakah, when we are talking about uh, someone who is going house to house, if you're in a Frum community, right? If you're Frum, then you're very well aware that you'll frequently have people showing up in your house. They're saying, oh, could you give me tzedakah? We're building this yeshiva. We're doing this. We're doing that. And so you'll give them, what you have, depending on what you have, you hand out tzedakah. That's what you do. When there is a need that needs to be met, a monetary need, right? There is a sliding scale. To give a visual representation, if you are on a GoFundMe page, there is a goal. Let's say that the goal is $5,000. And every time someone donates, no matter how big that donation is, the bar, the green bar that indicates, how far along to that 500 goal you are, it moves. So even if I, let's say I donate $500, okay, I moved that bar pretty far along. That's a pretty far stretch. It was very visible. Say someone who is more stingy, or maybe they're just poorer. They give $10. They give $15. Okay? So the bar doesn't move to the same place, but the bar moves. You're reaching a monetary goal, a physical goal that may have a spiritual imperative. Maybe this money is going towards a yeshiva, it's going towards a mikvah, whatever it is. It has a spiritual imperative attached to it, but it is a physical goal. To compare this to sexual intimacy between a married couple is irresponsible. To say that the bare minimum that a husband could give should always be good enough for his wife is damaging. We are not talking about tzedakah. We are not talking about a fund to build a yeshiva. You are talking about the love and the trust between a married couple, which means the world in a marriage. It means the world to building a healthy, happy Jewish family. This rhetoric, it is harmful not only to the Jewish woman, but to the Jewish man.
Number two, of course, which is true of every relationship, is the respect. No one wants to come home to a wife that he knows does not respect him. Nobody wants to walk into a room where they can predict and expect criticism.
I agree with the sentiment. I try to engage in not only my marriage, but my friendships, my familial relationships. I try to engage in those relationships in a way that is emotionally responsible, right? If I walk into the home, the first thing that I want to be met with certainly is not harshness, right? However, respect goes both ways. And so I am going to toggle to the 3 tips for men because I would like to outline how Rabbi Friedman packages respect for the men, and then we will come back and we will continue with what he has to say to the women.
Number one, of course, is respect. Respectful. To behave respectfully, to speak respectfully, even to think respectfully. For example, does being married to your spouse give you any rights? You have any license or privilege that no one else has? Like, for example, you can criticize your husband, you won't tolerate anybody else criticizing him. And why can you criticize your husband? Oh, your husband. That is a loss of respect.
So, already in the 3 tips for men, the example given uh, when talking about criticizing and respect and how to go about criticizing, already the example being used is not one where a man might find himself being disrespectful towards his wife. It is yet another example of how a woman might be disrespectful towards her husband. And as far as I can see, given the title of the video, women are not supposed to listen to it anyway. So who is the chastisement for?
Number three, if there is a need for some kind of criticism, some kind of correction, some kind of objection, how do you do it? The problem is that when you think you're right and she's wrong, you become self righteous. When you're right, you feel entitled to do whatever it takes, which of course can't be true. You can't do whatever it takes. That's a dictator. If you want to correct something, if you want to criticize something, it takes some wisdom and some thoughtfulness. So the first thing is, don't correct someone in real time. If you put your wife on the defensive, there's no one home to talk to. An example was this couple, the husband, all of a sudden, after many, many years of a peaceful marriage, suddenly is demanding a divorce. Immediate. He can't tolerate her for another day. What happened was that he invested his life savings in some deal and he lost it all. Obviously, he was devastated. His wife, trying to console him, said to him, "Calm down, it's just money." Not bad, huh? Pure wisdom. Great advice. Very mature. When she said that, he developed a hatred for her that he can't stand her. Wants a divorce immediately. And she's shocked. What? What happened was she did not share his despair. She didn't share his devastation. She was not empathetic because she really didn't care about a loss of money. Because she was not suffering with him, she lost her right to even give advice.
So again, we see that Rabbi Friedman uses yet another example, not of moments when a husband ought to have been criticized or corrected in some way, not giving advice on how a husband could correct his behavior, but rather yet another example of how a woman has done wrong by her husband, and how through her saying the wrong thing, having the wrong disposition, again, her husband lacking the self esteem to communicate with his wife and say, the way that you just spoke to me, the way that you phrased this makes me feel like you don't value my feelings. And then you have a conversation. No. The husband goes straight to divorce after a long, happy marriage. And Rabbi Friedman seemingly accepts this and says that when a woman does not do the right thing, immediately, automatically, she has lost her right to give advice. She has lost her right to criticize her husband. Fascinating, given what we are about to hear about how a woman ought to allow herself to be criticized by her husband.
So a husband who comes home to a wife who doesn't respect him is living in misery.
A husband who comes home to his wife who doesn't respect him is living in misery. Okay, let's continue.
In anticipation of his coming home, do you dress up or dress down? Are you in your house coat? Are you in a kerchief on your head because your hair is not combed out? And in general, maintaining a good appearance, which is an effort, but it's worth it because you give your husband not only something pretty to look at, but you're showing that you're thriving by being his wife.
So, a woman, not only, we're learning, I'm learning this with you, we're learning this together. A woman not only is expected to never say no to her husband, ever, under any circumstances, she ought to be available to him no matter what it is, intimacy or not. Something trivial, something everyday, something silly. She is to never say no to her husband. She is to accept whatever it is that he wants to give her. And she should always dress up when he comes home. Doesn't matter that she has 8 kids. Doesn't matter that she's the one taking care of them all day while he's out working, doing something else. She's wearing a Shabbos robe and the shmata. You're not respecting your husband. Um, interesting advice. Interesting advice. Let's continue.
Husband who comes home to a wife always in a down mood, it drags everyone down. Same is true actually for children also. Children come home from school and you're in a bad mood. This is a disaster.
In a video where you are addressing a married couple, um, you're addressing the relationship between two spouses, I don't see the need to interject into the women's video, but not the men's, that their behavior also has consequences for their children. When we are specifically talking about behaviors that could be changed within their marriage. Again, this does not come up in the video for men.
A child comes home, he shouldn't be cringing. He shouldn't be on the defensive. He shouldn't be expecting an angry or impatient reception. A husband should not expect to be met with criticism, with complaints. you you want to hurt his feelings, do it later, not first thing when he walks in. And it's a subtle thing. Even if you don't say anything, it's just a look on your face. So if you have to fake it, you may do so.
Assuming that when a woman criticizes her husband, it is to hurt his feelings, it is to put him down, it is to disrespect him. However, when talking to men, the assumption is not that a man wants to hurt his wife under any circumstance. The assumption is not that a man wants to put his wife down. The assumption is always that he has good intentions and that he's not always finding the right time to communicate. That's not the case here. The case here is that a woman desires to hurt her husband's feelings, but that there is a time and place for her to do so. That she shouldn't berate him with hurt feelings. She should come to him with them later. And again, likening a wife's relationship to her husband with that of her child is inappropriate. It has no place here. No place. A man is not a child. A man is a grown adult who has the same emotional capacity as a woman to build self-esteem, to build his own value, to build a strong connection to Hashem that should give you that self-esteem and that sense of value, right? The same emotional capacity as a woman. He is not emotionally defunct in this way. Now, let's get a little bit into what Rabbi Friedman feels that a woman needs versus what a man needs from their respective spouse.
The second thing you can do for your marriage is be appreciative. A woman doesn't need compliments as much as she needs appreciation. Women have an innate sense of value. They don't need to be reminded, and they don't need to be told that they are valuable. What they do need is not to be taken for granted.
Let's repeat. A woman doesn't need compliments as much as she needs appreciation. Women have an innate sense of value. Women have an innate sense of self-esteem that they are apparently born with that cannot be faltered. It is an innate spiritual, physical sense of self-worth. Women don't need to be reminded or told that they have value. They only need not be taken for granted.
Not admiring is not an injustice.
Not admiring your wife, not reminding her that she has value, that you value her, that you have admiration, that she has things that you wish that you saw in yourself. Not admiring your wife is not an injustice. Okay, so what does Rabbi Manis Friedman think to tell women? What does he tell women about what men need from them? Let's take a look.
The third thing for every wife, for every relationship is women need appreciation, men need admiration. You must have something that you admire in your husband. There must be something you admire, which means you look up to him for it, because he has more than you do. If you feel that you're ahead of your husband on all fronts, and there's nothing he can do for you that you can't do for yourself, it's discouraging and emasculating. A man needs to feel like he's got something to give, something that you admire because you're not as good at it.
Allow us to repeat. You must admire your husband, and this means you must look up to him for something because he has more than you do. Not doing this, again, we're going back to a sense of a lack of self esteem. He feels emasculated when he feels like you are not less than him. You must admire him because you are not as good as him. How damaging to the self esteem of a woman to say, you should remind yourself that you are less than your husband to make him feel good about himself. And what does this say about a man? That his entire self worth, his entire sense of goodness, of feeling worthy, ought to hinge on his wife being less than him? This is not an innate sense of masculinity. This has nothing to do with being emasculated. It is a natural human feeling of not feeling enough. You don't feel enough. Women also feel this way. It is a human emotion. It is not unique to men or women. And I tend to agree. Spouses should admire one another. When you are in a marriage, you are in a partnership. And what is so great about a partnership? Each person is bringing a different, unique set of skills to the topic, to the job, right? This job of marriage, it's a difficult job. It's one of the hardest jobs. So they're both bringing unique sets of skills. And with those unique sets of skills comes unique sets of, downfalls with flaws. We're not perfect. Men and women. Everyone has flaws. Everyone has flaws. Men are flawed. Women are flawed. And what makes marriage beautiful is that there are things in a wife that a man needs and he ought to admire. And there are things in a man that a woman needs that she ought to admire. This is true in any marriage, in any structure. I'm talking about a frum heterosexual structure for the purposes of this video because that is the context of which Rabbi Manis Friedman is speaking from. That was the entirety of the video, of each video. I want to show one more clip because there is one part of these videos that I thought was tremendously insightful from the rabbi that I really am aligned with.
Marriage is a dynamic process, which means it is a continuously renewing, regenerating uh, reality. It's not like you got married X number of years ago, there was a wedding, and you became married, and since then you've been married. No, it's an ongoing thing. You're constantly getting married. So when you get married, you're creating a new reality. So anytime we create a new process or a new reality, that process has to renew itself constantly. It therefore makes sense that you should celebrate the process every day. Yeah, some people have what is it called? Renewal, commitment renewal, or marriage renewal. sometimes in their middle age or later, but it should be every day. Every day you wake up, you find yourself married that day. And therefore, like every good beginning, you've got to improve, move upwards.
This was by far the most insightful, beautiful thing that Rabbi Friedman said in this two-part series that he created for a married couple. It reminded me of the Jewish concept of tzimtzum. And if you do not know what tzimtzum is, I'll give you a very brief explanation of it. Obviously, it's something that is very complex. It is mystical. It comes from our Kabbalah. So, if you want to learn more about it, I would really suggest researching that on your own time. But just to give you a brief overview, tzimtzum is the concept that God, Hashem, contracted a piece of himself to make room for the universe, to create the world, that God took away from him to be in communion, to be in a relationship with us. One of the most beautiful Kabbalistic ideas. It's something that I think about constantly. It's something that I try to apply in my relationships with people, and certainly in my relationship with God. This in of itself speaks to the partnership of a marriage. Tzimtzum, that each person takes out of themselves something to make room for their spouse. A man, a woman, whatever, a husband or a wife, they make room within themselves for a marriage, for a union with their partner. This is a partnership. It is not one party which must completely do away with themselves to fit into the other. This is not a relationship. Hashem does not completely retract from himself and, expect nothing of us in return. Of course not. That's not a relationship. It's not a communion. When you are in relationship with someone, when you're in a marriage with them, when you love them, you allow space within your heart for the person that they are, with their flaws, without their flaws, with their good, with their bad. This is a partnership. And if you had, and to you, Rabbi Friedman, if you had continued on this line of thinking, what a beautiful shiur you could have shared. And instead, what was received afterward was the complete opposite of tzimtzum, the complete opposite of the love of Hashem. I encourage you to think about what might have led you in the first place to misunderstand the woman as much as you have. Because I fundamentally believe this is an incredible, hardcore misrepresentation of the woman, of her needs, of her desires. And next to that, the way in which you frame a man's spiritual, psychological state, making him out to be so fragile, so easily broken. I'm left to wonder how you feel about yourself, how you feel about the people around you. I'm left to wonder how one could grapple with such a sad outlook on the rest of the world, of himself, of his spouse. So, before I end, I want to once again say, I'm not attacking anyone. I'm not trying to speak derogatorily of anyone. I only wish that this sentiment should be no more. That healing should come to anyone who listened to this message and internalized it. To any man who internalizes that they are fragile, that they are weak, without having to dominate over a woman. You are not fragile. You are not weak. Your self-esteem comes from inside of you and in your relationship with Hashem, if you believe in Him. The same is true of a woman. Your value comes within you, and it comes from Hashem, if you so believe in Him. And the idea of a marriage is that you strengthen one another. You strengthen one another's values and self-esteems, and you remind each other of each other's goodnesses, and you help each other when you fall, and when you falter, when you do something wrong. You lift one another up. You don't expect one to receive criticism and not the other. You don't think badly of one and not the other. Each person has struggles, has good times within that relationship, unless it is strictly abusive, obviously. But in a normative relationship, each person has a flaw and each person has a strength. And when you learn to accept that, and you also learn to accept that you can love yourself and know that Hashem loves you, you will never need to rely on someone else's idea of your value, because you mean so much more to God than even your spouse. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Goodbye.